It certainly is.
The recording is in progress. Hello, everyone out there in internet land. Welcome to another Underworld Party interview. And today we have the luminous, the effulgence, the effervescence, Marya Stark, who I've been wanting to talk to in this way for a long time. I've known Marya in orbit maybe like 5 years or something. And so I'm really happy that you are here now where you are and a little landing that we both had a little landing.
Mm.
And now we just get to talk about the fun stuff that we do and like to do. So I'm
Mm.
really just, blessings to you and all your relations, blessings to your family, to your people. I'm really happy to know you in the way that we know each other. And yeah, I'm just wondering, is there any way? Oh, here's what I'm wondering. Here's what I'm wondering right off the bat. If this were a dream, and it is, how would you like to introduce yourself? Or how would you like to enter the stage?
Oh, today I'm in the mood for um like a like dancers that like one at a time come in on trapeze and then suddenly slowly there's just this parade of like bubble blowers and fanfare and then they're all like ta-da and they're like whole like that one scene um in The Little Mermaid where they're like having this big parade to introduce Ariel, but she's disappeared somewhere. And so there's this like big fanfare of like, whoa! And I'm kind of just in the back of the audience, like so delighted, like, yay, it's all happening, but I don't like, I'm supposed to be there, shit. And then I like run on stage, but my hair's kind of like schnorked and I don't have my epic gown on yet because we're still building it. It's still
Yeah.
building it. I'm not totally there quite yet, but it's getting close. But the choreography of the fanfare is dialed, and the costumes look great. The bubbles are excellent. It's happening. The lighting looks good.
Right on. Yeah. You just get to sort of roll out of bed into this like, little Nemo style. Like, oh, I love it. I love it. I love it so much. Well, Maria, I just want to, say this is a little backstage because I usually say this before interviews, but I'm a big improviser, so I love to sort of just go where the muse is, and we're gonna talk about that. But what I love to sort of tell artists when they come on my show, this little show that got my show, when they come on the show, I say, don't worry about explaining or making sense to anybody. Like
Uh,
I know that part of our job in sort of real life, the real life dream, is we have to facilitate and explain and sort of like walk people through a series of understandings. But I want this, I want your conversation here to be like, you don't need to worry about that. You don't need
mm,
to worry about explaining unless you want to. And
mm.
that's a fun little game to play. It's like backstage scene. Here's the short notes. Is like you don't have to be the kind of artist, teacher, everything that you normally are. You can just be the artist if you want to be on the podcast. And I'm saying that because I think it's you brought in that energy of like ready, not ready. And I think that's useful to be like, oh, right, like this is how it actually works. Like everyone's an artist, everyone's a teacher, and you get to decide what costume you wear. And that can be an energetic spiritual choice, right?
I love that invitation to when I hear that, what lights up in me is this sense of getting to live in the mythopoetic conversation without having to analyze it
Yeah.
or without having to, what one of my favorite teachers says, is dismantle the angel.
Mm.
When we're in the dream and the angel has arisen and we're having the gift of that transmission of a thank you, we don't have to wake up from the dream and then check out what part of ourselves it represented. Just gets to be this gift.
Yeah, that's it. That's
I
the
love
jam.
I love that invitation right now. And I love that you're bringing that into this conversation with the muse because I've been I'll just jump right in here. I think my one of the deep inner perspective taking crucibles that I have been in personally around the muse is exploring the muse in terms of like first person, second person, third person. So I'll go like first person muse. I am the muse. I am the embodiment of divine creative energy. I get to draw, be a divine creative source magic. Second person muse. Oh my God, there you are, Dare. Oh, and we're having this moment, and it's exciting, and there's this, like, life, eros, wildness, and charge and exchange. And then, um, and then this third person muse, the big Maha muse. And the crucible I've personally been in is in the second person muse when people have come into my life as like, wow, these angel representations of whole realms that awaken them inside of me, remember them, thaw them in me, and then I think one way I've been sense making around that in order to not get possessed by obsessiveness and the neuroses of attachment and addiction to relationship is to say, oh yes, of course, like I'll go into dismantling the angel. I'll go like, oh yeah, well they activated this part of me from my subconscious and blah 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 from my early childhood, and that was just a rupture when I was 1 years old with whatever, and now they've come and helped awaken that part of me, and now I can relink that to my God, my divine source, and now this second person obsession can dismiss now, and now we're all empty and nothing and everything's fine. And and so that's been really useful for
Oh
me
yeah,
in
I
cutting.
highly recommend it. I highly recommend this
Highly
process.
recommended. And I also am turned on by this stepping back into welcoming that angel to come arise in my life without having to dismantle it and locate the subtexts, base mind, whatever the representations are. And I love, yeah, how we're stepping right into that exploration.
I mean, that's where I live, honey. That's where I live. I'm like, how do I not be possessed by all of the wonderful amoral energies that exist? Like fire, water, wind, wood, like they don't really care. They're just like, I'm having a party, shape shifting, it's like there's no, I like to say that lately what I've been thinking about in terms of like the larger Maha, which is like the culture as a dreaming body that is kind of fragmented, right? Like it's kind of like, hey, whoa, culture is not doing okay all the time. Like culture slips into a kind of place that's not okay. Is to kind of just, hold that and then think of this like weird little rubric which is like ethics and imagination. You can have like low ethics and low imagination, and that brings out like a somatic state, right? Like you can feel it, like low imagination, low ethics. I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I want to play. And then there's like high ethics, low imagination. And we know people like that. We know people who are possessed by high ethics, low imagination, right? And then there's this inverse, which is like low ethics, high imagination.
Very dangerous, very magnetic,
Very magnetic, very dangerous.
highly
Yeah. Yeah, right? You're like, uh-oh. You're like, uh-oh, I think I've dated some people like that, you know? And it's totally awesome, but you have this low, 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 high low thing with ethics and imagination. And all three of those that I just named are a little bit like not quite chef's kiss, right? They're not quite the thing. And then there's this other realm that I'm trying to go, let's aim for or cultivate in ourselves high ethics and high imagination.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's not a binary. Like, I don't even know. Like, high ethics, high imagination, there's like a lot of options there. There's a lot of
Uh-huh.
options. And we're
Uh-huh.
all gonna inhabit that a lot. But I think of like, so we've got this mass streaming body of audience participation. Like the audience is the stage players. Oh, I see. And then we cultivate in us this witnessing quality that also is able to take the stage and recede back also,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like now I'm the audience, now I'm the main stage singer, right? Like, and high ethics, high imagination the whole time. Can we
Mm-hmm.
do
I love high ethics and high imagination, and it's there's so many frames that pop up when you say that. It's like, oh yeah, emptiness and compassion, bliss and wisdom. It's
Yes.
like that. I think it takes a lot of imagination to be able to surrender enough to bliss.
Oh, this is so terrifying.
It's like, oh, I was like, wow, I really have to imagine a kind universe in order to surrender to that. High imagination.
Yeah.
and and that ethics, that healthy sense of our alchemical impact, it with like but with which I see as a form, as an expression of wisdom,
Mm,
and an
mhm.
expression of wisdom, of really getting to extend my sense of self to include others,
Yeah.
and include, like, to have boundaries and extend beyond simultaneously, like a
Yeah.
healthy
Both
ethics.
and.
Like, wow, how do we have ethics and also, like you said, not be rigid in the way where it's like, oh, because I can tell. Yeah, I was having this really interesting insight the other day. I was in a council court, and we were looking at, it was something about leadership, like, oh, what do you really value, or what do you take a stand for? And I was like naming all of these voices of, like, oh, I'm a stand for this and a stand for this. And I could feel the ethics one in me kind of coming in and sort of wanting to shut down my voice and everything that I said that I was a stand for, because there was a voice in me, and and sometimes we call it, oh, it's the critic, the one, that the naysayer. But in this moment, I was hearing her as the, like, kind of an ethical checkpoint. She's like, well, like, you're actually not a stand for those things, because all of these other ways that you're not integrated in taking a stand for that, how could you say you're a stand for? So I could see in that moment, I was like, oh, holy mother, like, that ethical one that's bound to, by honor, to
Yeah.
stick with these covenants that
Yeah.
I've decided were true. And it was just an interesting play of, like, wow, these are the values that I long to include,
Mhm.
or as an expression of my ethics, and yet here I am expressing my ethics and shutting that down. And it was really just this beautiful kind of a double bind of
Totally.
seeing, like, wow, I'm really in this thing. And so that's a place where just recently I was like, oh, having this awakening, and a lot more self-compassion, I think, for the way that we hold ourselves back from fully living in the imaginal, open curiosity, exploring, discovering, creative, embodied magi, is anytime, wow, there's like an inner map of what's okay, what's not okay, and is seeing something not congruent there, and then we'll just try and protect us from the, for me, like, humiliation and embarrassment of being seen as not,
Yeah.
not in integrity or something.
Totally. Yeah. 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 Well, it's interesting too, I think, because we have this profound capacity as humans, and especially when we're children, but just in general, we have this profound capacity to be fascinated, right? To just have fascination, which isn't necessarily like what do I do with that, or how do I fix that, or how do I gain power from that? It's not, it's just this kind of like awe of like the game, the infinite game of reality, right? Like flowers and birds and mud and, and to be fascinated by like, oh, I can take some of this mud and throw it on the wall and now I can make designs like, whoa. It's like pre-paint, it's like pre-art, right? It's like the spark of art is not art, it's something else,
Uh-huh.
It's like not quite a thing that we can name yet because we
Mm-hmm.
don't know. really. You don't
Mm-hmm.
really know. It's like marks on a page or sounds in the air. It's not quite music yet, but that's great. I like that place. It's like I'm not quite singing, I'm sounding.
Mm-hmm.
This has really helped me a lot in my life. But then we have these double binds that I think are fascinating too, because usually we hear in the kind of realms that we travel in, the double bind is a bad thing, or a double bind is like a way to get into freeze, like nervous system freeze or something. But I hear what you're saying in this non-dual way, this wisdom way, which is that like there are double binds that are actually about maintaining integrity of the network.
Uh-huh.
There's like not quite a double bind, but it is a kind of like yes and like, yeah, you're totally free and also not because you are related to everyone else. So, and Tyson Yoka Porter, I've been listening to a lot of him lately. He talks about that too. It's like you're totally free as an individual. No one can tell you what to do, but you're absolutely limited by the ecosystem relations that you actually are indebted to.
Mm-hmm. And that's that like sovereign and interdependent, like sovereign together.
Right, like I can do whatever I want, and also that whatever I want is immediately limited in a beautiful way by my relations that I care for and that keep me alive. And that could be the oak tree, that could be the termite. Like it doesn't have to be human, but it also is human. It's like to be limited by ecosystem is not a bad thing. Although in the West, we often get angry at that.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, angry. And I wonder where that anger really comes from, if it's just confusion, because it's so complex, right? It's a lot to extend our sense of self to include one other person. Like, there's just a lot of complexity in there. And then to extend to, wow, other interspecies, like, and I mean, it's such a, and then also I find too it's like sometimes it's easy to expand to the whole universe, but it's hard to just include my closest 200 people.
Right,
Like I can go meta, but to just be right here,
right.
whoa, actually in integrity. And I love the thing about integrity in integral, like together, and like in congruence. I think congruence is such a beautiful word in
Hmm.
general when we consider all of it: healing, alchemy, art, being in the flow state, opening up beyond
Hmm.
any like idea or ideology that would limit expression, that would allow for that channel to arise and be in that thing. It's like the experience of congruence and it'll change over time, because congruence for a 5-year-old, just like you said, sounding and playing, like they're congruent, and then for like someone who's 10 or 15, they have more going on. Congruence is going to continue to keep shape shifting
Totally.
as we keep adding layers to the onion of disappointment and knowledge and
I like to say I like to say that my life is really a series of me revealing how naive I am.
Aww.
Like oh, the things I was doing 6 months ago were really just trying to show me how fucking naive I was, and that's a beautiful, terrible gift, right? It's like oh, how how wonderfully fucking naive I have been and will continue to be, because that's the point. It's like, oh, in a year from now, I'll look back and go, wow, you were really super fucking naive about X, Y, and Z, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But there's something to like I've worked with kids a bunch in my life. I don't know, have you worked with kids in
I
your
have a significant chunk of time working with the littles.
and let's I don't know, I'm super interested just from a personal point of view, like your takeaways on what you because you were working I was working with kids with movement, and I think you were working with kids a different way, right?
Yeah, I was working as a music therapist. And so I was doing one-on-one and group music therapy circles with kids, usually with different developmental differences. And I also worked even before then. I worked for Music Together, which is a company that teaches early childhood music development and enrichment. And so they have these like mommy and me circles where the whole family comes with their infant to 6 year old in these multi-aged group circles of like 12 families to play music together. And we have this like each season we'd have a collection of 20 songs. We would cycle throughout and play all of these different games and go up and down and share and have people come out. And it was this really amazing experience to watch children at all different phases of like expressing and experimenting and then like listening and just taking it in and learning, and then to watch also the parents and the families respond to the kids at different learning cycles too, because if a kid was just sitting there and watching, like we were trained to tell parents to stop interfering with kids just sitting there. And that was always really interesting to see parents being like anxious that their kid wasn't doing anything or they're not getting anything out of the session or whatever. And
Yeah,
the kid's like
totally.
totally just watching or maybe humming or bouncing a little bit or watching. And it was the entrainment that was happening and the imprinting that was happening at that time, and watching just all the whole lineage sort of stories in the parents' minds, and
Right.
that whole like kind of shape shifting that's going on. And in the best moments, I mean, it was so adorable to see. I mean, I think my favorite in that whole cycle was working with infants. The infant class, there was one class I taught that was all infants under 9 months old. And so it was all just like carrying the infants. So there's no expectations of the infants, and all the mommy and daddies would just like hold their infants all in a circle. They would all stare at each other at like the high point of the song, and then we'd like go back to dancing. And those moments were so amazing. Like, just these like movement music parades with these children, and to normalize music making in families was the point, and to sort of just expose children to music as the way to learn, not that they're sitting in a classroom and they have to do it or they're gonna get great. It's just like just exposure to it as normal, and over time was the way. And I
Totally.
love that.
I
Yeah.
mean, this is what I think I've missed in my life and what I'm trying to kind of do on the back end. And also like when you look at sort of how social technologies developed in human history, singing prefigured or pre came before language. So we actually can say that music and singing is the bedrock of like our social technology, our being together. And yet in the West right now, we have music relegated to this kind of hobby or this
Uh-huh.
kind of like, this entertainment field, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Like it's like music is entertainment now. We put it away from the center. But
Mhm.
if you return it to the center, the amount of like flooding of neurochemicals that you receive just by like spiritually attuning to that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I'm so into it. I feel like it was one of the things that kind of set me on my path, was coming into those realizations early on studying music therapy, because they're putting it at the center. It's like, wow, music, the whole mechanism of our neurology, it's all turned on when we're engaged in a music making experience. Our whole brain's turned on. It's like one of the only experiences that does that. And that's so interesting to me. It's like, wow, our whole brain is designed in such a way that when we're engaging in this experience, we're completely online.
Yep.
And like you said, like, oh, these origin points of language is like coming from imitation of us imitating the sounds that we were hearing, just like sounds. And I always wonder if our listening has changed also, that like, oh, if was there a time when there was an ability to hear the sounds of nature and the music and nature a little differently than we hear it now. I've also tripped out on like, what are the moments in, like, I think about these early humans pre language as we know it, that were more in that grunt style, and then what was it that happened when one of them brought like a sound, like a bowl and a stick together, and like banged in a rhythm, and like what happened when did that start happening? When did they start hitting it, and then all of a sudden someone opens up and like sings multiple melodies like for the first time? Like there's just some online thing. Like what happened with everybody else? What did they have an experience? Like what did they think was happening? You know,
Right.
like what would I think was happening if I had heard that for the first time ever?
Right. Yeah. Like, what does the flower feel when it blooms? You know, like
Yeah.
there's a kind of like, cause back in the day, and you feel this when you go into a jungle now, like a real jungle, like not like a curated jungle, but like a real one where,
Not Disneyland jungle.
yeah, not like a kind of like more like a national park or an actual jungle where like the canopy of sounds is constant and like almost deafening, and we dissociate from that kind of background noise. But maybe our human deep time ancestors were actually embedded within this kind of polyrhythmic cacophony. And then whenever they started, banging, clacking, chattering, walking, stomping, etc., you can kind of take that artistic distance. You know what I'm talking about? The artistic distance to kind of go, there's something going on here that's actually really interesting.
Yeah.
Like get a bunch of chattering happening and then take one step backward into that kind of deep listening place where you can kind of be like the director, the curator, the choreographer, and start to go, okay, let's do this and then stop. Let's now start it again. Stop, start, stop. Even just the simplest kind of creative input suddenly starts to ignite something where you're like, ooh, right, because the birds are doing that and the bugs are doing that and the creek is doing that already. So they're already providing a kind of drone, right? Like there's already this kind of layering already. And then we get to be a layering inside of that layering. And then, right, like what you're saying is like everyone bang two rocks together. And then somebody goes, "Ah," and suddenly you're like all misty eyed. Your vagal tone is like, oh, like it's that freaking simple, right? And yet, the feeling of it from the inside, I think we need to pause on the analyzation a little bit. Like, we just need to experience that for the first time, every time.
Uh-huh. And how here we come back to dismantling the angel. And I think it's really interesting that in the here we are in the West where we're like we've gone into such a neurosis of explanation that like we have to go into these deep worlds of like, oh wow, well we found out why this is so important, what it does to the nervous system to calm us down and bring us back into these states where we're actually feeling at one with nature again. and and it's interesting where and yeah, just the drama of consciousness over time where it's like, oh wow, we started here and then opened up to here and then opened up to here and then fragmented and then are we here and then utilizing these same things to come back into
Right.
something,
Totally.
some kind of congruence.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
This, and also including the things that we learned when we fragmented, because I think that's what the West is doing. They're like, the West is essentially saying fragmentation is beneficial, and I can see that on some level, right? Differentiation is beneficial, right? Like individuation and differentiation and this kind of rite of passage we go through is extremely useful in a maturation process, right? It's like the baby doesn't see a difference between their mother's body and their body for a while, right? Like that, they actually somatically are entrained into their mother's body while after they're born. They're not like differentiated from that environment yet. And then they start to differentiate. But then as we die, we become childlike again. As the yin grows and the yang recedes, we have this kind of so called senility, but it's not. It's really, we're just yinning again. And I think as a culture, we're trying to get to that yin place. And I think a lot of people are afraid that that yin place means there won't be another yang place, right? Like, oh
Uh,
no, the wave is cresting. There won't ever be another wave again.
Uh-huh. What is it about? I feel that way every time I like am in the winter season. There's like,
Yes.
and I joke about this with my love all the time. It's like, oh, I'll be on like this high wave of creativity and I'll be writing songs, and then I'll be on a pause, I'll be in that reflective state, like sometimes like those inner children, right? We're just like, oh, I'm just taking it in. I'm in a receptive cycle, an absorbing cycle, a listening and a living my experience cycle, and I'm afraid. Oh my God, am I ever going to have an expressive cycle? And then it's like the inner parents have to be like, well, are the parents going to be like trying to pull something out of me? Or is my inner parent going to be like, oh, that's perfect. Just like every single time you've ever had a wave for hundreds of cycles now in your lived experience. Remember?
Yeah. Right. And I find it to be very helpful to do this kind of thing in deep time with my ancestral body,
Mm,
because I think that a lot of our anxieties are because we have ancestors who actually got arrested development in those cycles.
uh-huh.
Like they never really got to have multiple full, like, crests and breaks and absorb stillness and then back to a kind of eruption again, right? Like the
Mm,
whole cycle of like I'm small and then I become large and then I pandiculate and then I fragment and then I come back to stillness slowly, like this kind of cycling of like both a body in a breath cycle, a body in a kind of maturation cycle, but also in like a kind of overall family cycle. This
mhm.
kind of like, no, everyone's just got their own this and that. And I do this with clients. I'm like, just do this for a while before you start talking again. And I get people to do this and they're like, oh, I feel things happening. I'm like, mm-hmm.
Mm.
Because there's a point for everyone where we either dissociate from it and skip the feeling of it, or we don't stay long enough in any one part of the cycle because we are like, no, got to get back to work.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And it's like, for me, it's like, well, where in that got to get back to work is this juicy place where I suddenly have a dream? Like the muse actually is waiting for me to like fucking
Mm.
just, can you just fucking like stop past, like, look, I made a tea party.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
And you just keep running by with like, gotta get back to work. Thanks for the tea. Rah.
Right. And it's this fear of death. I think it's that when we consider the alchemy of like, oh, dissolution of all of the elements, dissolution, like preparing to die well, so that we don't just kick ourselves and repeat all of the cycles that we have just been running through our whole time. And I think this is why I love the path of the artist so much, is because there is this opportunity in devotion to taking the whole art cycle, creative cycle, as a path of going through the whole life and death cycle over and over and over, with new parts of the self, with new parts, new muses, new aspects of self that are wanting expression outside of me, so that I can be in reflection with and then absorb the chi from and let the old shell die. And it's like this beautiful personal exorcism, regeneration constantly. And I love that. And it's this piece I noticed for myself too, that the biggest spiritual muscle and gym that I'm growing consistently is how to have how to let things die, or let cycles that are created, like, go on the whole wave and actually pause long enough to have a natural ripening for the next cycle. And as someone who has I experience myself to have a lot of creative energy and a lot of inner pressure
Yes.
to express, that training my nervous system to hold the potency of that without needing to discharge it immediately is an ongoing inner alchemy tending, that it's helping me become more soft with myself and mature over years. I see it as one of the long life alchemical just gyms that I'll be in as I prepare to die well, and it is preparation for death, I think, and getting to have these beautiful time capsules on and every journey into the underworld. It's like, oh, here's another one. Wee,
Yeah.
add it to the collection.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and for me, it's like this underworld journey. I mean, the name of the podcast is Underworld Party, so you kind of already see where I'm going, with this on a kind of meta level is like every time we die is another opportunity to celebrate, but it might not be celebration in the way that we're habitually defining it as,
Mm,
right? Like we can celebrate by resting. And that's like one of my, kind of like, hey, Dare, all your ancestors been struggling to survive and not be oppressed for X number of fucking generations. And that's great. And it produces a kind of never resting quality. It produces a kind of like, well, got to get through this next task, got to get through the 18th labor of Hercules, kind of thing where at a certain point the creative process doesn't really work that way. Like it's not like a kind of bespoke on demand process, right? Like gotta pop out another one, kid. It's like, well, no, that's not how my internal constellation of beings wants to create or generate or regenerate or remember, right? It's not the way they want to dance. It's not the way they want to make love. It's not the way they want to like eat food. And yet there's a habit pattern. There's a habit pattern that is like just anxious, right? Just an anxious attachment pattern, right?
I got that same one, and I feel it's this because what I know as a creator for to produce like a big body of work, for example, that it does take a certain amount of coming to like getting on the mat even when I don't have the energy for it. And not pushing myself to have energy that isn't there or draw from an empty cup. It's actually shifting, being soft enough to shift an orientation of enough to actually access energy again. That is, and it's this tricky thing because it's like, oh wow, if I only created when I wanted to, or when I was inspired to, then I wouldn't able to cultivate devotion in the same way. And what we're coming back to, integrity and discipline. And discipline is a tricky word because I think it can be something that can help and something that can hurt. It's empty, and it's like it depends on what other neurosis patterns are attached to the outcome of what discipline's supposed to get me, like these things. And how do I get to rest into discipline as a structure to support me when I am habitually going into these places of self-doubt, and then I get tired and lethargic and I'm not able to find the fire. And then there's something in the discipline that's like reminding me of these other core values that I have that actually are stronger than the subconscious beliefs that I have that I'm not good enough. And then now I'm like, oh, I'm negotiating with like, actually these my beliefs around integrity are stronger than these beliefs. And then I'll have a surge of energy, and now I'm in flow state. I got through the resistance. Because it's, for me, it's like when our mind is so malleable and our energy is so malleable, one day I could be so tired for 5 hours and something will change and suddenly I can go for 10, right? And it's just like, well, what changed?
Yeah.
And how can I be soft enough in my nervous system so that I can actually listen to the voices that are participating in like in a negotiation in order to like do a thing or not do it. And again, with bigger projects, I find that I have to be in that council a lot to get anything done, because do get things done on a schedule. And it's like, I don't always it doesn't always work that way, but I do challenge myself to consistently aspire towards putting things on a calendar and have accountability and
Right.
converse with the resistant bobos. And if they're just like, look, you're tired and you actually are doing too much, you need 3 days of unstructured time, then do I have all the similar discipline to give that to myself, even though there's an alarm system going on in in my nerves that are saying you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough, and that this is the other side of discipline is actually advocating for, hey, those voices aren't the wise ones either right now. I mean, they're wise and they have wisdom to bring to the conversation, but they're not going to be driving the boat right now. We have to actually take these 3 days of deep rest, or you're going to be depressed for a
Right.
lot longer.
Totally. Well, I want to bring some things together because what you just said there, it's like I just want to say, hey, people, rewind the tape and listen 3 more times because there's a lot in there. And we might not touch on it all, but it's in the kind of field. And how many, like, so, okay, lightning round. How many albums have you sort of produced in your current lifetime?
Finished albums: one, two, three, four, five, six, and I'm finishing one now, seven, and I've was a featured singer on one, eight. So seven, eight
Yeah. And
albums.
over how many years, and did that actually speed up? Like, was there like a trajectory? Like, was it like album, pause, and then album? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, like I'd say in my early 20s when I was extremely prolific but completely disorganized. Uh, I attempted to make multiple albums and I had multiple, I'm gonna say, stillbirths and miscarriages of those albums that were devastating and highly frustrating. And and then I had a change at age 26. I recorded a live album, and then 27 I put my first real album out. And then I had some time. I had like 4 years and then an album. And then it's kind of been like an album a year every other year since then. And now I think what happened was I mean, as a performing artist, it was really a game of how do I balance work and financing these projects and having enough chi to have excitement and creation. And I think it just took a minute to find an ecosystem of productivity that was aligned with my values. And I was going through a lot of healing and stuff, so it just took a minute. And now I feel very like I'm in a pace where I actually set a goal for myself, knock on wood here, like to release an album a year for the next 5 years,
Right.
to just put myself in the inquiry of what would it take to sustain that level of prolific creativity while also have experiencing plenty of spaciousness in my nervous system and a lot of pleasure, and what would get to change in how I operate. And so I've been in that curiosity for the last year, and it's we'll see how it goes. That's the plan currently though.
And I want to bring this into something because I read somebody did a translation of one of the stanzas of the Tao Te Ching, and the line that's coming out to me now, highlighted from the mist as you were speaking, was like, the sage is one who acts without struggle. Something like that. Like it's like they're not doing. They're totally in the doing. They're like producing some behavioral effect. But they've learned to be with doing, and all the ecosystems that produce doing, including nourishment, rest, hygiene, etc., right? All of the multiple ecosystems of sort of maintenance and sustainability, so that acting and doing, creating, basically generating, is a non-struggle. Like there's no struggle. Like we're cooperating. It's cooperation. There's no struggle. Just cooperation. Right? And I think the term sage is an interesting one because we have a lot of associations with that. But I would just say the practitioner or the adept or the one who is on a devotional path. And I want to bring that back into the conversation because you mentioned it a few stanzas ago. And I think that it's very interesting to kind of think of being an artist as a path of devotion. And I'm really interested in sort of your lived insights into this kind of like art and life as a devotional praxis.
Yeah, devote. I would love to know the etymology of devotion, right? I'm not sure quite what it is. What my experience is that it's this innate, again, it's just the juice, right? Like it's so exciting, creative, like life is so magical. And these little whispers of vignettes of capsulating a life experience, and oh wow, here's a couple of stanzas, and it's like, oh wow, now I can have this whole frequency that's been in the periphery of my perception here right in front of me, and now we can toggle with it because it has a name, it has a container, it has a capsule. I feel like art for me is the practice of bringing things in the periphery forward into conversation on some level or another, and that is, it's kind of like right at the edge where I think it's like consciousness is sort of understanding itself in form. And so I get to be an informant, or I get to be part of the informing team. I think we all are. I think every human is that and has that capacity. And I think the difference for me as a devotee is just being in conscious, deliberate, dedicated relationship with that as lucidly as I can possibly sustain in a limited in my own limited limitation of incarnation, right? It's like,
Yeah, right,
well,
right,
I'm
right.
gonna do my best to stay lucid to how magical everything is. I'm gonna do my best to stay lucid to how much love and beauty there is to be alchemized in all of the chaos.
Mhm.
And when I do that, I feel really yummy. When I do that, I feel like I'm in connection with the Maha divine. And so, because I've had that lived experience since I was a child, at every stage of development, I've had this state experience of being in communion with God, love, art, as me, coming through me, with me, all the things. And so path of an artist is devotion. I mean, it just for me is the place where it makes the most sense. It's like anything I've been developing, like it's really catalyzed all of my interest in psychology and energetic medicine. Like all of it for me has just really like, cool, can you give me more insight on how to make more interesting art?
Yeah.
Like, can you help me be a person who has greater capacity to make greater works of art and include more people in those experiences, so that I can take this I thing into a we thing, into an all is thing. And I find that it changes day to day, and it changes at what stage of the process I'm in. Like, because at different, and I think this is really different than the kind of templates we get in the West around productivity and discipline. It's like, oh, it's a linear, like these are your disciplines all the time. And I find for myself as like an estrogen based hormonal system that's not effective. And I also find that as a human creative magi mystic wonder person, that also doesn't work either. And so the devotion is to the softening compassion with myself, and to listening. It's like, what is needed now for this stage of the commitment that I'm into with the mystery in this moment? What's needed next? Is this still congruent with the original vision? Has the original vision changed? Does this still relevant? Does this need to die? Is this a stillbirth? Is this something that's not meant to come to full term? Like, to be in devotion, it's like, it's not create and finish at all, by all means. It's like, it's even bigger. It's like, how can I respect life and death enough to listen to and get to embrace the gifts around projects that are dead, or embrace the gifts of like the lessons and the teachings, and not hold that in my center as some failure or some ghost of like, oh, I failed as an artist because my first 3 albums didn't make it to term. It's like, oh well, I'm so grateful I had a lot of support at that time that I was able to honor the losses. I mean, it took a while,
Yeah.
But just like as an artist, like wow, as a devotee, to
Right.
continuing to like sustain this intimacy with magic
Right.
in the face of devastating loss, in the
Totally.
face of complex human experiences that I can't figure out, that I can't control, that the one in me who wants to be perfect and like all of my rigid ego strategies can't actually like how do I stay devoted to magic enough to let all of those shells go as well and absorb all the life force energy and continuing to open the vessel to be a greater and greater conduit. That's what devotion is like for me at this time.
That's wonderful because, for me, I've come to the term very late in my life because it contains a lot of weird cultic associations, right? Like to be devoted in some part of my ancestral, who's he, what's it, is like, yeah, is to be sort of like to give yourself to a guru in a way that's actually not what you're talking about,
Uh-huh.
right? It's to say, I'm just a cog in this other giant machine that is not agential. There's no agency there. There's just kind of I'm now food for this other being's creative cycle, right? And I think that devotion, I I've come to it maybe on sort of like a reverse trajectory where like if I can truly appreciate all things, not even things that we call losses or failures, but to actually say like, okay, so let's write a poem about failing, or let's do a clown act about failing or losing.
Mm-hmm.
Something in that triggers an alchemy to me in like a kind of reverse trickster kind of way where it's like you took something bad and in the kind of playing with it, playing with bad,
Mm-hmm.
you had something that wasn't bad. It wasn't, there was a real alchemy there that can be experienced within like 2 minutes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like having a tantrum on purpose is something
Uh-huh.
I like to
Uh-huh.
say, right? It's like don't just have a tantrum because you went over threshold because you're like resisting something.
Uh-huh.
Actually start to be able to go, do I just want to have a tantrum? Do I just want to like preemptively have one? Like because there's something in me that's like getting ready to have to fight something.
Uh,
And if I can just go, oh yeah, okay, let's just have a little wrestling match over here with the
uh,
snake. Let's just wrestle with the snake instead of like waiting for the snake to become a dragon, which then is like oppressing you.
right. I
Like
like this
there's all this
act of
narrative about it, right?
I like all this active tantruming because I think it's really respecting the part of our like base mind that we don't have access to necessarily, but it's we're having the lived memory in our systems of whatever these pieces are, and that when we get to just go and have these deliberate, dedicated spaces to explode and explore. I mean, I think it's a really compassionate act. I think it's one of my favorite things to do in my relationship too, is have these like creative clown tantrum moments as like to preemptively dispel anything that would come into a like you me opposition fight. It's just like, oh, like there's an arising energy, it's too complicated for my conscious mind to process. I want to go into meaning making and fuck you, make wrong story, poor me
Yep.
about this.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we can just like stomp it out and be and like get to do the tantrum. And I love that it's one of my favorite things because it's like, okay, we're consciously exaggerating and we're getting to let like do all of the muscle tensing and
Yeah.
like eye explosions and like let
Yes.
these goblins that are in us just like have a place to be safe. And and there's that other aspect of integrity, right? There is an ethical container around it. I love these places. It's like, okay, well, we've set it up, we've created a containment, we've made there's some sort of agreement that we're not going to take this personally.
We've lit some incense and set a timer.
We've like set ourselves up to embrace the wild unknown goblin of our unconscious, and like now we're gonna let it ride. And then they're so happy, that goblin. And usually underneath there is like a little 4-year old that's just so happy to be dressed like a goblin that day. And they're like, yeah, we're going out for Halloween. They're like, yes.
Yeah. Right, totally.
Because they
I
make mischief if they like you said, they become dragons, they totally are mischief makers and they come out in like the weird Heyoka later, I think in uncontained ways. And I am in a consistent, ongoing conversation within my intimate people of like how do we build the muscle strength to be able to pivot as soon as we recognize, hey, I think one of these like goblins are in the field. How do we get it right away? Like, what are the early signs? What are the language cues that we need to put on? Do we need to grab the monkey? Do we need to grab a mask? Do we just need to grab the drum?
is there like a scarf or like a place on the floor with like a red mat that like is the place, right? Like when you walk into there, you get to like have it. And then when you walk out, you get to take it off. And then you can just do it as many times as you need to. But we get to play with this kind of conscious like no none of this like it's possession, but it's not like this Exorcist 1972 kind of thing. It's like a kind of like, no, I'm going to put the mask on because the mask is me on some level. Like actually there's a part of my whole selfness that actually needs to like have fangs and like rip its own skin off, and like God is needing to have that experience on some dream level, right? Right? Like we just need to have it. And then yes, how do we make that a kind of normative, okay, ritualized relational praxis in our communities? For
Right.
sure. Like
I mean,
that's
I think a lot of pain, I think a lot of painful ruptures in relationship would be well supported by such a thing because ultimately those painful relationship ruptures they happen because of our early ruptures in our system, and those systems are just trying to complete the cycle. And of course, as we know, we attract people who we love, we get the excitement, and then on some level we're gonna play the thing out. It's like, how do we play it out? Do we play it out as opponents, or do we play it
yes,
out as artists?
yes. So good.
Yeah.
I love it. I wanna sort of segue towards the end here because we could just talk forever and I love it. But I'm super stoked. Like, let's sort of say like you have some things that you're building.
Mm.
I'm curious if you want to sort of just talk about what you're excited about, like
Yeah.
current projects or whatever. I'm just kind of opening that window to be like, tell us about what you're doing in a way that really lights you up.
Well, in the last couple of months, I have been building an etheric and online space for all of these muses and creative ways of exploring personal development and process called Temple of the Muse. And in Temple of the Muse, this is the place that's an extension of my art. And it's the place where I get to facilitate and share and bring people together to go through these journeys. And I'd say that currently the different doors in the temple, we have different rooms in the temple. And so one of the rooms is the rose womb sanctuary, where I work with women, femme identified folk, working with similar that we've been talking about is like how to be in gestation, how to work with life and death and all of the cycles, the cycle that bleeding women go through, and how that applies to how we can work with that to move into greater vesselship and stewardship of our being and respecting of all of these cycles so that we can like bring forth the full like nuggets of the treasures of the womb and creativity. So there's multiple offerings in there that I'm super excited about that are going to be coming out in the next couple months. One's just a 3-day immersion and online, and one's a 9-month
Oh,
experience called the Rose Petal Path. So I'm super excited about that. It's been many years in the making. There's one room in the temple that's the Sound Jedi Dojo, which is just the vocal alchemy playground with Elijah, my brother Elijah Ray. We created a couple courses that take people through and building a community around how to work with sound in all of these different ways to explore the edges of time and space and consciousness and our dreams, and working with the voice to re-sanctify our voice as this tool to get to play with all of the parts of ourselves and integrate them. And come into these places. And then my one of my favorite rooms in the temple is the Hall of the Bardic Arts, which is where we go to play to court the muse and really get into songwriting and exploring different muse things. And my brother Travis and I probably next year are going to lead an adventure course for around the muse and actually take people into kind of like a mixture of Dungeons and Dragons and like spell making songwriting thing. I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, but we're
Yeah.
excited about it.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah, so cool. So cool. Yeah, because as someone who has, dabbled in a kind of like poetry, but really it's like language as an evocation, like
Uh-huh.
language and prayer as a kind of way to change state and also actually shift relationship, right? Like
Yeah.
this is something that I'm so interested in is like I can see that a lot of people don't have secure attachment to language
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
secure attachment to sound making, which is different, right? Like there's sound making and vocal production and like tone and like whoa, just the ability to like let the voice run down the fields and become a bird and then a horse and then
Mm-hmm.
water.
Mm-hmm.
And then to actually take that belly based, earth based central channel production of sound so that it's like it actually regenerates the system rather than exhausts the system, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of where this podcast idea even came from. I was like, I just want a
Mm-hmm.
place where I can like talk and it be regenerative for everyone.
Uh, uh.
That's like where this came from. It was like 2 years ago I had the idea, and then I think about a year ago I finally was like, it's got to happen, because there is these gestation periods where the system is resistant to something, and then it just becomes the thing that you do, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then to go from the sound production, the vocal kind of shape shifting alchemy of the voice to something that is like deliberate prayer spell making, where like you actually have to accept that all humans are magicians and actually
Yeah.
everyone's casting a spell right now.
Mm-hmm.
There actually is no non spell casting human.
Right.
Like you have to get to this place where you're like, right, everyone's just at some level of adept and we're all just like firing spells off all the time with our expression, with our thoughts, with our feelings, with our everything. Oh, everything is happening. And then to use the voice, to employ the voice as a kind of crafter of those spells. To
Yeah.
actually go and it's kind of like this non-denominational religion. It's like I don't know who you're going to pray to. I don't even know who you need to pray to.
Mm-hmm.
Where is that prayer going to land? Who is that prayer going to? That poem, that love letter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that bardic like kind of courtship.
Mm-hmm.
We can be in a constant process of discovering or encountering that interrelationship.
Uh,
You're like
and I
like
love
I'm
that. And I
so
think
yeah.
just as you're saying that, I mean, that's really for me, Temple of the Muse devotional path, like all the sound stuff, like it for me was this return of divinity back to this animist, like primordial expression that could also for me, I think I was just in a place of needing to reconcile with how the fractal of consciousness evolved through rigid religious views, science, all the things, and they're like working out these same things. I'm like, is there a place to just be with the delight and commune, and then extend that love towards others and include that like there's complexity, there's paradox, there's neurosis, it's all happening within this same field, but it dismisses for me this like inner opposition to things, or this place of like, oh, it's not the way I see the world, and so I have to like be in this hyper vigilant tension and constantly there was something around that. I was like, oh, I really want to be in my own magical mythos of sound healing and light and like music consciousness on, the big cosmic song of creation. Like for me, that's the heart, that's the center of gravity. That's the place that I want to stay this lifetime, and relating to, yeah, the epicness of all that is. And I was like, oh wow, because it's for me, like I get to stay in the frame of like all that is part of the thing, and it's magic, and I get to play with it. Hooray. It's really simple at that point. And there's no like that you said, like, oh, like how we learn about the guru, it's like, oh, it's over there and I need to like bow. It's just like there is that way where like, okay, what way do I get to bow to creativity in a way that empowers me to see myself as a part of it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right. These kind of multi-directional rather than these unidirectional relationality pathways, you know?
Yeah.
Like we often think of like indigenous communities and colonial communities, and there's like this one directional penetration from like colonial into indigenous, which is really like this age-old alchemy of like sky and earth, right? It's like light penetrates the darkness and suddenly you have a baby called life, right? But it's interesting that like we still have a lot of cultural and personal narratives that prevent this kind of flow. Like the tide comes in, but the tide also goes out. And like without both, you don't really have anything. You know, without the inhale, you don't have the exhale. And without the exhale, you don't have the inhale. And to make sound is exhaling, but then you have to inhale nourishment. It's like these kinds of orbits that we are embedded inside of, and then as like little human, you know, with our little magic hat to kind of learn the technique is to kind of embrace that which already sustains us. Right? Like we're already being fed and pooping out soil. We're already doing that, right? It's like it's already happening. And then to sort of come into a little conscious play is to go, oh, like this thing that already carries me, I decide to devote my life to be a carrier of it as well. Like that which I carry carries me, and vice versa, right? Like I'm carrying my ghosts are carrying me. I'm carrying the descendants, and the descendants are carrying me. And this is how I've had to learn to think about like trauma. Like I'm carrying my trauma, and my trauma is carrying me. And in that moment, the mythopoetic emerges to be like, well, honey, you don't really know what trauma is, do you? And that's great because now you're open for something to happen, right?
I love that. That which I carry carries me. And it's that thing of like, yeah, we're all magic, we're all spell crafters. And then and then it's just that, how do I cultivate the wonder about that enough to keep me in a consistent relatedness with it, where I'm activating will, and I'm activating deliberate congruent action with, and holding space for that, like developing the imaginal and developing the healthy ethics, so that these like wings can like help me fly in that relationship.
Totally. Yeah, like and to just recognize that there's not it's not an on off switch, but we in our complicated confusion, which is another spell that we cast, a hallucination that we cast upon the world, to think that we are disconnected in some way. To think that when we're sick or when we're ill or when we're kind of fallow, when we're kind of empty, that we're kind of cut off. And to realize that like that's not true, that actually being empty is like a longing and a preparatory repose that allows the other and allows us to receive the other, right?
Yeah.
And that this idea of disconnection is so embedded in our cultural narrative, in our cultural stories and poems and songs, and we have to in some way reimagine it to be like, no, there's just tide out and tide in, and you're somewhere along that continuum, and at some point in that continuum you feel despair.
Yeah.
And like the culture is kind of in that place of like the tide's going out and we've hit the point of collective despair, and it's no longer useful to dissociate from the fact that we've done that, but it's also no longer useful to say that it's true, to just
Yeah.
kind of go like, yeah, this is the point in the cycle where like we need to clean out so that we could receive, right? Like we're like the like it's almost like for me Gaia, the universe, Tao, Holy Mother is actually just waiting and has infinite patience. This is the best part about the Holy Mother for me is like death. Death has infinite non-human patience.
Amazing.
And the love involved in that is that eventually we will become exhausted by our resistance to that. I become exhausted by my resistance to reception. And in that moment, there's a mutual receiving of me and the Holy Mother can actually become like embraced. There's an embrace that is not human. You know, there's like for me, I think of it like the holy dove or like the God self actually becomes able to rest within the body because the body has ceased to fill itself up with nonsense that would prevent a resting place from being available,
Yeah.
right?
Hey, Dare.
Yeah.
I have to go pee so bad.
Okay, let's go pee. Let's go pee. I'll pause everything.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're back.
And we're back. Okay, so like we started with this kind of dream invitation, I want to kind of end with a kind of similar dream invitation, which is to say, like, you know, if this is a dream, and it is, how do we want to exit the stage? How do you want to exit the stage? Are there things that you want to share still that would feel in congruence with this kind of arc that we've been on in just this conversation?
Mm, mm. I, in that same dream, there's the like coming onto the stage and like it's the middle of the fanfare and then like sitting there and then all of a sudden like landing on stage, all the fanfare disappears and it's just like the empty room and the center stage and the light and this like prism, this like beautiful prism crystal that is in front of me in my window. I'm like seeing it come with this like delivering this maha baptism of like like, and I if I would include that into this arc that we've been on, um, I'm into baptizing ourselves in our own delight of creativity and in our own delight of you were saying naivety, but I'm gonna say like of the unknown, of befriending the unknown. And I'm just personally in a heart, but one of the heart locks that has been gently being like teased open in me is befriending the unknown in a new way. That I can tell that a lot of the uh, boundedness and anxieties and these have come from places that haven't been in like full welcoming of the unknown, because there's this like, oh, I'm in the I'm gonna be repeating these other things. We can't do that, so we have to avoid them, but then we'll repeat them anyway. And there's this wonderful like, oh, what else is possible? The unknown, when we can slow down and rest enough to allow a vision to come, or this baptism of some new aspect of the soul that's ready to come online. And so I bring that dream, I bring that prayer, that we can as culture creators in the spaces of the listeners here. I'm sure and everyone here listening is in one way a culture creator and creative, and attempting to fortify their own relationship with their own, one sense of wonder and place in the realm. And so may we continue to cultivate a wonder with the unknown, befriend the unknown, allow the unknown to be the place where all that has ever been our favorite thing to arise. Like including everything that is not our preference, but it's like it has been the place where everything that has been wonderful has arisen from. And so I close with that.
I love it. And the laughter and the mystery and the laughter that comes with the mystery, like for me, I just like to end with we have this interesting thing with spirituality and awe and fascination where we become breathless in the space of this mystery, unknown, death place. We become breathless. And I think that the cycle that wants to complete is to go from breathlessness to laughter.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, because we laughing does make me breathless, but it like pushes it out so much that I have to take it. You can't like ha 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 and then hold it out. It's a
Uh,
lot harder to do that.
yeah.
Oh.
The fluttering, right? Like the fluttering of laughter and the fluttering of the wings of the birds and the fluttering of the water in in the spring and the brook and the river, the fluttering of nature, that sort of rapid inhale exhale that is carrying us through the gateway, the gateless gate.
The gateless gate. Thank you.
Well, Maria, this has been so much fun. I'm so psyched to continue to be in relationship in whatever way that unfolds. I'm going to check out your stuff. Please let me know when you have something to share, and I'll send it out to the community. And
Oh,
I'll
thank
put all
you.
the details of your stuff, your website, and everything. I will put that in the show notes. But just so that it's recorded, can you just tell me? Can you just say aloud your website or anything else that you'd like to?
Yeah. Well, my music website is my name, Marya-Stark.com. Please come check out Sapphire and that album and that full visual journey. It's my most recent baby. It's almost a year old now, and I'm so still just riding the waves of that big adventure with the muse. And then templeofthemuse.com is the space to come explore learning, being part of creative workshops with me, being on these deeper initiatory rides where we take the muse as the mirror into our own psyche and in our own delights and draw forth creative sparks from those places.
Awesome. And for everyone listening, where to find what me and Larissa are doing, patreon.com/animistarts. That's the current portal for all the things. And my website, bodyalter.org. And stay tuned because a newsletter with some fall announcements is going to be coming out in the next 2 or so weeks. And we're super excited to share with you everything that we are giving birth to. So thank you all so much for listening, to spending your precious time here with me and Marya talking about the things we talked about, the spirits that we invoked and evoked and that are evoking us. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dare. That was so fun.